So we are here with David Simon, the creator of The Wire and Treme. And David actually gave one of the more controversial plenary speeches, I think, in Jewish Federation history Sunday afternoon.
That was controversial. I hate to sit through a lot of those because, again, I was trying to be polite.
Yeah, well, I guess that's my fifth GA in a row, and that's about as racy as it gets.
Wow.
At least,
Wow.
before after hours. So I was hoping maybe you could just sort of recount, for the people who might not have heard it.
Well, I've had a critique, a very not that I think anyone in organized Jewry is listening, but I'm not self-hating. I came up in a Jewish household, and my father was in fact a professional Jew. He was the PR director for B'nai B'rith from early 50s, early 50s until 1985. And after that, worked on their retirement fund, and his whole life was given to B'nai B'rith, Jewish service organization. So this is not the voice of some angry apostate. But having covered poverty in the city of Baltimore, and having researched the post-Katrina world for the purposes of making Treme, that's been pretty much my professional life. It's been a great disappointment to me, the degree of detachment from Jewish charities and Jewish service organizations from the problems of the inner city.
Right. I think that's actually really, really important for the people that might watch this. You're essentially an insider, or the son of an insider in the Jewish nonprofit world. I'm wondering if maybe you could talk about what your sense was from your father, what the Jewish world might have been engaged in when you were growing up, and how maybe that's
Well,
changed.
I think when my father began, there was a lot more dynamic between the African American and Jewish American communities. A lot of that had to do with the vulnerable nature of the African American community politically. Jews were very involved in the civil rights movement. They saw their own cause mirrored in that of civil rights for African Americans, and so they were very involved in things like the NAACP or SNCC or any of the integrationist groups of the 50s and 60s. But there came a point where African Americans, by necessity, by political necessity, needed to take control of their own political future and become their own leadership. And there was to liberal Jews, it may have felt like an expulsion in the mid-60s, which is where I would think that was the beginning of the divorce between these two communities. But actually, it was a necessary seizing of the reins. You don't, until you control your own leadership, you don't control your own destiny. And there came a moment at which it had to happen. Once it did, a lot of other things where the agendas of those two communities are not the same took prominence. The other thing that happened is that, in cities like Baltimore and I don't know about New Orleans, actually going back this far, but I do know in Baltimore and Washington and other places on the East Coast, certainly, the Jewish relationship to the African American community was mercantile. I mean, they were the corner store, they were the landlord. I mean, there was a lot of, they owned the nightclub on Pennsylvania Avenue in Baltimore. That was where the rubber hit the road in terms of the relationship. So it wasn't always on an even keel. So there was some residual and understandable resentment. And that manifested itself over time, over Jewish opposition to quotas and to affirmative action, which in the Baki decision in '73, or to black anti-Semitism that you saw with the rise of people like Farrakhan and demagogues like that. There were a lot of reasons for the divorce to happen, but none of them were good reasons.
And Baltimore especially, I grew up there, so I know that there has been over the last 50, 60 years this migration of the Jews, northwest of
all the way up
Baltimore,
Park Heights Avenue and out to the suburbs.
And where the Jews leave, the black community comes in.
That's absolutely right. And listen, every group has aspirations. There's been a black exodus from the inner city to Woodlawn and Woodmore and areas of the county that have become middle-class African American. That's sort of a natural occurrence, or it certainly was with the rise of suburbia in America. I don't think that's the problem. I mean, the problem is that, like, when I went down there in 1992, 93 to write a book about the inner city and West Baltimore and what had happened, I was encountering 14, 15, 16-year-old black kids who I was the first Jew they'd ever met. And I'm there with a notepad just to tell some stories. They had no dynamic with any Jewish service organization. There was no connection between these two communities. And frankly, the onus is not on them. The onus is on the community that has the wherewithal, that has the ability to provide service and provide charity. And very tellingly, I was doing that project with an Irish Catholic former detective, and I was a Jewish American former newspaperman. And I'm not an apostate, but I'm not particularly religious. I'm maybe 2-3 times a year Kol Nidre night Jew, and he is a fallen Catholic. He's not going to mass very much. But the two of us, I was the more embarrassed, because everywhere I looked, the Associated Catholic Charities in Baltimore had a dynamic presence in the inner city. They were trying aggressively to address the deprivation and desperation of this community, and which was not Catholic. It was in no way Catholic. And yet they were there. They were running the soup kitchens. Bon Secours was doing the drug outreach. The job training program that was coming out of St. Martin's, or the NA programs, the Narcotics Anonymous, that were being run out of the church basements. There was no comparable effort on the part of the Associated in Baltimore. So I said so. And when I was invited to speak about the corner, Park Heights synagogues, it was all very nice. I was a Jewish author. I had the right bona fides, and I thought they were going to hear nice things. And I really felt the need to tell what I thought was true.
So, I guess there are really two questions to follow that up. Did you have conversations with the Associated itself on the one hand, and what were your conversations like maybe with your friends or your colleagues in Baltimore? Maybe if you were immersed in any kind of Jewish community there, what were their conversations like versus what you think might have been?
Well, I wasn't really involved in the Jewish community, so I have to say I didn't really move in circles where I could have those conversations. I am a member of a synagogue in Columbia, Maryland. So it's sort of the opposite. If you know Baltimore, I'm sort of more. I grew up in Washington, and I wasn't. My son grew up in Howard County, so I was actually part of a conservative, and then part of a conservative synagogue there. So I really didn't move in those circles, but I just knew I raised it without belligerence and just with an argument that. Whatever you're doing, you need to do more, and an argument that I don't care how the divorce started, and I don't care what Farrakhan said, or what Mayor Kahane said, or that you thought your cousin didn't get into medical school because of I just don't care. There is need here, and it's your city, and we're not going to make it if we don't accept that we're all part of the American collective. The American collective has been very, very welcoming and very good overall to the Jewish community, and it's been a very hard road, much harder than our road if you think about the origins of African American life in America and where it's come from and how much they've had to overcome. They are deserving of our empathy and our aggressive support, and I found that to be disappointing. And so I said so, but I said so. I don't think I used the word disappointing. I just expressed what I knew. I knew my audience. I knew that they had not come there to be criticized in the slightest, and yet the reception was icy cold.